What's up, everyone? So for Thanksgiving week here, we've got a fun episode. It's another Q&A. I have compiled questions that I've gotten from my Instagram profile, some questions I've gotten over on uh, Bigger Pockets, and one or two messages I received on, I believe, TikTok, which I just recently joined. I gotta say, very interesting. TikTok is something else. Not saying it's bad. It's just something else. Anyway, we're going to dive into a little holiday festivity and do a Q&A here. Some of it's funny, some of it's serious, and most of it's real estate related. I hope you guys enjoy. So just so you know up front, I'm going to run this episode a little differently. Normally, I don't pause recordings. I kind of go straight through. But in this instance, I'm actually going to pause in between questions, bring them up, start the record button all over again. And so there'll be little pauses in between as we're transitioning from questions. But the first question I want to start with is, what was my biggest mistake in real estate? And this came from Sandra. Sandra, gosh, I feel like I've got like 20 years to cover when I'm looking at real estate mistakes. I think the first one that comes to mind is actually one when I was an employee for a property management company. I want to stress I was like probably 18, 19 when this happened. So obviously years ago. When I was first starting out sort of professionally in real estate, I was working for another property manager, one of three, I think three that I worked for. And I was tasked with being the assistant to the director of operations. And one of the first weeks that I was there, they were in the process of doing an eviction. And I forget the details exactly now, but I was tasked with following up on the eviction, getting documents to the attorney. And my 19-year-old self missed a deadline. And that was a huge deal. I think I forgot to submit, maybe was it the tenant ledger, or I forget what it was, but it was something that was absolutely critical, and it resulted in the process having to be restarted again over from the beginning. That's probably one of my more, I guess, depressing moments that I've had in real estate, because I really felt like I let obviously the company down. I let the owner down. My boss was actually pretty great about it. She understood it was my first like 2.5 weeks in the position. I kind of got thrown into it in the middle of it. And what I learned from actually the way that she handled it was that she said, you know what, it's part of my responsibility though to follow up and make sure that you're doing things and that calendar deadlines, like these important ones, are being met. So I really learned a lot from how she handled that, in the sense of she didn't just plain place on me. Like, she took a little bit on herself and said, you know what, part of this is on me as well, which obviously was not something I was expecting being a 19, 18-year-old fresh in that position. The next question comes from Nikki over on Instagram, and she was wondering what the funniest story I have regarding the holidays and being a landlord or being involved in rentals. So this one actually comes from about 6 years ago, Nikki. I managed I want to say it was a 6 unit building where the tenants did not have garbage disposals. It was a dumpster situation outside. Anyway, day after Thanksgiving, the on-call system gets an emergency call for a stopped-up toilet that was constantly overflowing and wasn't stopping. So the maintenance guy goes down, and obviously he's expecting to find, poop and other stuff that are clogging up the toilet. He gets to the unit, and he goes into the bathroom, and he can't believe what he sees. Like, he turns around, looks back in the bathroom like, wait, am I seriously seeing this? The tenant was attempting to get rid of their turkey. Mind you, like half of a turkey carcass, by flushing it down the toilet. And this turkey was just like sticking up partially out of the toilet bowl. It was like packed in there. Like its leg was like starting to go down the chute, but then like the rest of it was just like stuck up, popping up through the toilet bowl, through the seat. And it was just like, wait, seriously? So this tenant had tried to do what they normally do, which is flush their food remnants down the toilet, given that they don't have garbage disposals and because their trash pickup was going to be delayed until like the following Thursday because of the holiday. And I don't know what the situation was, why they weren't putting it in their fridge or whatever, but they're like, no, this turkey's got to get out of here today. And they decided to try and flush it down the toilet. And I could not believe the picture when it came through to me. I thought it was a viral picture that he had downloaded from the internet until it took me a moment to recognize the vanity and the colors on the wall. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's actually one of our units. Somebody tried to flush a turkey. Now, in case you're curious how this ended up, like how we ended up addressing this, I don't know, this is just crazy to think, but we actually had to shut off the water to the toilet, get as much water out as we could, and then we legit had to break open the bowl in the middle of the bathroom because that turkey was so jammed in there. There were bones that were clogging up the thoroughfare anyway of the toilet. So like there was just probably very little hope of actually saving this. So he ended up taking out the toilet, smashing it into pieces in the bathroom to try and get it out. Because a toilet itself weighs a lot. And then when you've got like a 10-pound turkey in there, I mean, let's just say that's a pretty heavy beast there. So, but that's how that ended up. The tenant obviously paid for a new toilet. The tenant also paid to have their toilet routed out because just to be safe, obviously wondering what else they had possibly managed to try and flush before we got there. We had a router company come out and route out the sewer line and stuff before we put the toilet back on or a new one on. That tenant did go like 3 days without a toilet, and they said because it was their problem, they created it, they were just going to pack up their stuff and go to their mom's for 3 days. So, but that was probably the funniest holiday story I have related to rentals is the toilet turkey that was practically waving to us out of the toilet. This is actually a really good question, and it's something that I don't think I've ever mentioned on here, but the question is from Jacksine. I don't know, it's a Instagram username again. So Jacksine was wondering if I send holiday cards to tenants. So I have sent holiday cards to tenants in the past. When we managed a very large complex in Wisconsin, we definitely did holiday cards then. Everyone on the staff signed them, maintenance, office, higher ups in the company. So we definitely issued Christmas cards there. I have not actually personally issued Christmas cards for my tenants that I own the property. Mainly because I try and keep my management company on the forefront of it. So that's why I don't issue Christmas cards to my tenants. But I do have an LLC, so I really could just issue Christmas cards from my LLC, but it seems kind of weird just signing a Christmas card, you know, RK John Investments, or it just seems weird to do that. So if I'm not actually signing a name, it just feels weird to send out a Christmas card, which might be probably the silliest reason ever. Because if it's still a handwritten Christmas card, which all of ours always were, they were always handwritten. We never did labels. We never did anything like that. We signed them all individually with pens. The employees hated it. Like there would be times where they would try to avoid coming into the office to turn in timesheets or whatever because they did not want to have to be pinned to sit down and sign Christmas cards. But if you're going to do Christmas cards or holiday cards, I would definitely sign them personally. Don't like outsource it to a company who makes it even look like it's handwritten. There's something about writing the card yourself that's going to make it so much better. And I guess so people don't make it sound like I'm a complete like Scrooge or a Grinch or Mr. Fish Odor from Bob's Burgers. I did just recently write a thank you card to one of my tenants. I wrote him a thank you card because during the summer, when things got a little hectic for my husband who does our lawn mowing, one of my tenants took it upon himself to actually mow the lawn at a quad that we have that he lives at about 2 or 3 times throughout the season. So I was really grateful for that. And of course, it took me so long to get to it, but I do write handwritten thank you cards to my tenants every once in a while when something like that occurs, and I feel like they really do deserve it. I just haven't made it a point to do holiday cards. I definitely recommend that you do holiday cards. So this is one of the things, like, do as I say and not as I do, because I really truly believe that issuing a Christmas card just lends this aspect of human touch to the relationship where you're kind of reminding each other that you're both humans. Next question comes from Mark over on Bigger Pockets. Mark and I engaged in a conversation when he was getting ready to buy his first rental in Wisconsin. He is an out-of-state landlord, not exactly as familiar with our state statutes and other things like that. And one of our conversations, he asked me, I've heard about people putting a clause in their leases in parts of the country that are affected by winter that a tenant cannot move in or move out within a certain period of time, mainly talking about not moving out between November, December, January, and February. Is this something that you include in your leases? So as I said to Mark, this is actually something that I do not have in my leases. I do not have a clause that says you cannot move out during winter months, and I do not have a clause that names certain months that you cannot move out. Biggest reason I do this is because I am really concerned about how a judge would look at a clause like that in a lease. Even though Wisconsin is a more landlord-friendly state than its neighbor Illinois or than even New York, I really don't see a situation where a judge would look at that clause and go, yeah, that's legit. I'll let you prevent them from moving out between November, December, January, and February. That's 4 months. That's a whole extra 4 months. I don't even see it working if it were 2 months. I just feel like it's a situation where a judge is going to say you cannot do that because you are infringing on their rights. You know, they have the right to move if their lease is up and they're on month to month, or their lease is ending in that time frame. You don't have the right to say you can't move then. So that's why I don't include it in my leases. The other reason is because, particularly here in Wisconsin, if you're in the habit of issuing year-long leases and you have a clause in there that says you can't move out, let's say November, December, January, if you move someone in for an October 1st move-in and you have that clause in your lease, you're basically saying that when their lease is up in November or at the end of October, like, they're stuck then for another 4 months. They can't, like, say, well, I'll extend it 1 month. And then the issue with that, obviously, is if you're doing like a November to November, if you don't let them move out in November, but it expires November 30th, well, then you've created a lease that is technically for more than a year. And in Wisconsin, if you have a lease that is more than a year, you're subject to a whole different mess of rules and regulations per the state statutes. So those are two of the reasons that I honestly avoid putting in any no winter move out clauses in my leases. This is a cute question I got over on Instagram actually last year, and I didn't fit it into the podcast because I wasn't really working on the podcast that hard last year. But one of the questions I got asked last year on Instagram was, what is the most festive thing I have done for the holidays with my tenants? So about 3 years ago, when we managed a large apartment complex in Wisconsin, I mentioned it earlier in this podcast, one of the things that we did was we had a holiday lights contest. So we invited all of the tenants to decorate their exteriors. It was a different type of complex where everyone had their own exterior door. So it was sort of like a townhome situation. So we encouraged the tenants to decorate their front flower beds, their front porches for Christmas. And we had the owner incognito go around and judge and pick the winner of the holiday lights contest. And I have to say, it was amazing how people got into this. There were tenants that had attached inflatables to the top of their lower porch. There was like this low-hanging porch which hung over the entryways. So they were putting inflatables up on top of those roof porches. They were putting like a massive amount of lights around all their windows and around the doors. There were, of course, candy canes in the flower beds along the sidewalk. It was so great to see them. Not everyone got into the holiday season. I say we had maybe about 30, 35, maybe 40% of the complex that really kind of got into it, like hardcore. And then there are a couple of people who you're like, well, I don't know if you just did this because you always do it or are you entering the contest? But it was nice to see that much festivity around the complex that time of year. And tenants had a lot of fun with it. And I think we ended up giving them like a $50 gift card or something to a local restaurant that year. So it was something that they all had the opportunity to win something, and the owner enjoyed judging it, just driving around and seeing everyone be festive and active in the community. So that was actually a really fun experience. And our last question for this Turkey Day Q&A: how do you feel about smart thermostats in rentals, especially when a landlord is paying for the heat? Oh my gosh. I had this conversation like 4 or 5 years ago when smart thermostats were first coming out. And I expressed deep concern over landlords using smart thermostats in occupied units where the landlord is providing the heat. First off, I want to say if you are not providing the heat, there is legitimate no reason that you should be monitoring their heat usage. So if you have a smart thermostat in there because it's great for when it's vacant, I wouldn't be monitoring it when they're occupying the unit because that is just bad news bears. But the question was posed about using it when you provide heat. Now, I still have an issue with this because maybe you haven't chosen to provide heat in the sense of maybe you bought the property and it already was set up this way and it's going to cost like $15,000 to make it otherwise. Look, I understand. Maybe you didn't choose necessarily that this building was going to have heat included, but alas, you're at this point where you're including heat. And now, yes, there is technology out there that allows you to monitor what the tenants are setting the heat at. But that doesn't mean you should. I do not recommend using your smart thermostat to monitor or change the heat for a unit when it is occupied. The only situation I would see that being okay, regardless of whether you're providing heat or not, would be if you're just checking to see if the tenant has kicked on the heat yet because it's getting really, really cold. Maybe it's going to be negative temperatures and you just want to be sure that the heat's actually turned on, because I've actually had it, a single family home. A tenant went on vacation. It was sometime like beginning of November. She had no idea it was going to get this cold when she left. She didn't turn the heat on. When she got back, her basement was half full of water. There was a whole bunch of water damage from busted pipes. So I do understand there are some situations where it would be nice little peace of mind to just pop in there and make sure the heat is actually set on. But don't monkey with the temperature setting. If you're providing the heat, it really is none of your business what the temperature is set at. It can become your business that maybe the heat is set too high when you get a bill for it. But to be sitting there on your couch monitoring it like at random points throughout the day, I just think is a terrible situation. I also would not be actually adjusting the thermostat under any circumstances. If I actually had a smart thermostat in a property where I provided heat and I was looking at them, I will look at it and say, okay, they're setting it to 85. I'm not going to adjust it in my app. But what I'm going to do is I'm likely going to send a letter and follow up and say, once I get a bill, be like, hey, the heat bill is a little bit higher than normal this year. If possible, I'd like you to keep the thermostats around 70 to 75. I would truly appreciate it if you would, because it would help keep the rent costs low. But I really can't get behind this idea of monitoring a tenant's heat usage through a smart thermostat. I just can't wrap my head around it. I think it's a huge infringement on their right to privacy, regardless of whether you're providing heat or not. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up this rather quick Turkey Day Q&A. I hope you got a laugh or two out of it and maybe just some generally useful information. I'll do another Q&A for Christmas. I think they're just a fun little holiday thing to do. But next week we will be back to some regularly scheduled content that is not Q&A. I hope you guys have a great Turkey Day, a great Thanksgiving. If you're going out for Black Friday in the US, gosh, I hope you survive it. And I will see you guys next week.